So today we're going to talk about roll cages, whether you are building a new roll cage or you are trying to buy the car of your dreams that has already a cage and possibly a logbook, or you are trying to get a logbook, or you're a scrutineer issuing logbooks. We're going to look at the various aspects of cages, what to look for, what to pay attention to. We will be looking at the cage design that work and the one that do not work and why cage do fail. And we'll also be looking at the trade-off in the design for impact absorption. So for the first part, we are going to look into the overall construction of roll cages. Note that all the information in this video can be found on our frog racing website in the text section on the roll cage page. And here you will have all the information and the links to all the details in this video. Rally roll cages are built according to FIA Appendix J Article 253 that has a description of the safety rules. The actual roll cage diagrams and fabrication requirements are described in Article 253-8. So here we have a typical FIA 253, Article 253 roll cage. It's called a 6-point roll cage because it has 6 feet. The mounting plates must be welded to the chassis, and they must have a minimum size of 120 square centimeter in the front and 60 square centimeter in the rear. So the main design is a 253-3. So it's a main hook here that is one bar, one lateral on each side. There is one here and one here, the bar that goes all the way down. And it has a transverse member, and it has 2 rear laterals going to the back. That's the main structure of the cage. Then you have 253-7, which are the diagonals. So the roof bar design is a V in the front, coming to the center of the main hook to a V in the back. So the front is called 253-14, and it's only allowed if you have those 2 bars in the back that are actually pushing back the forces from the front to the mounting points, and those are called 253-22. Another common configuration is an X in the roof, which is 253-12, with a X in the back, which is 253-21. Then we have the windscreen support bar, which goes from the top of the windshield to the bottom of the cage. It needs to be gusseted if it intersects with the door bars. It's also known as 253-15. So the door bar is an X, and they are called 253-9. So one bar, the main tube, is straight, and the other bar is in 2 sections. You can see the weld here. And so we have to have gussets every time there is a junction. It is also possible to make the X from 2 continuous bent bars and that are joined by a gusset. We also have an optional seal bar that has 2 purposes. One is to protect from impacts on the rocker, and in case of a frontal impact, prevent the front foot of the cage from moving back. The forces from the seal bars here will also be transferred to the strut tower in the back, and also optional bar between the 2 strut towers in the back. So when you look at the cage from the side, this bar of the door bar cannot be more than half of the opening of the door. The bar itself can be secured to more than half of the main hooks. That is not a problem. Here we have a reinforcement bar called also a temple bar. And when you mount those, the same thing, there is a minimum distance between those 2 bars. And the regulation for the opening here is so that you leave enough room to get in and out of the car, which sometimes can be tricky with the 2-door. When the B pillar is ready for out, that dimension can be tricky. All the bars shown here are optional bars, and none of them are actually required. So you have the anti-intrusion bars that can extend to the front strut towers, and you can note that the dash bar is actually optional, and often people choose to integrate with the stock dash bar. The harness bar is not a structural element of the cage. However, in the 2024 updated rules from the FIA, they simplified the rules and removed all the previously existing configurations to only retain a transverse bar secured to the backstay. It is also a good idea to gusset the cage to the chassis at the A pillar and B pillars if possible, as this will make the two structures work together and be much stronger. The cage must be as tight as possible to the chassis, and there are maximum distances that the cage can stick out so that it doesn't impair the vision of the driver and co-driver. If you want to understand why roll cages fail, you have to understand how forces get dissipated in case of an impact. Let's look at this example from the Center for Advanced Product Evaluation, or CAPE, on a sprint car.
Is the way that the chrome moly tubing absorbed the impact. Pretty much all the damage is from here forward. So that's a good thing.
In case of the frontal impact, the tubing bent and absorbed the shock. But they did a second test with a vertical impact, and then they realized that the cage collapsed. And if you look at where the nodes are, the tubes are bending between the nodes. This is one of the main reasons why the junctions between tubes can't be more than 100 millimeter apart, so that the forces are actually transferred to the node but are not bending the tube. Now let's look at the famous crash of Peter Solberg in the ProDrive WRC Subaru in Germany. If you look at the original FIA homologation paperwork for this car, the cage has a single diagonal in the roof, and it is missing the other diagonal going from the back corner behind the co-driver to the front of the driver. Interestingly enough, in later homologation, the cage was updated and added the missing bar in the roof. So the first impact is heavy on the front near the co-driver, and you can see that the bar came slightly down and the weld has failed at the gusset holding the windshield bar. But on the second impact, there is a heavy impact toward the rear near the co-driver. So we get a big impact on that side of the cage, and there is nothing to prevent that corner from coming down. There is no roof bar maintaining that corner. This bar here is going to collapse down here. The rear is going to come down here. The whole corner here is coming down here. The front of the cage does the same, where this bar here is going to break at an angle like this. Here we're going to have this coming here. On the driver's side, actually, the roof bar is going to pull out that corner too. So there's a bend here, and this bar here, this windshield bar, collapses all the way down. So now this bar that were here, the corner that was here, comes down all the way bent up to here, and the whole cage has collapsed on the co-driver.
Okay. Huh? All right.
Luckily, Phil Mills was okay after the incident, but you can clearly see on the picture of the aftermath where the tubes were bent and how the cage collapsed on the co-driver side. In the next iteration of the cage, Subaru added the missing roof bar to address this problem. As a quick side note, use halo seats if you can, so that you keep your head inside. Another incident we need to talk about is the crash of Schaefer at the Rally of 100 Acre Wood in the US. This car had the roof bar design known as 253-13, which is a V towards the front of the roof. And while this design is still allowed in the FIA rulebook, it doesn't offer any support for the front corners. And here it was a relatively slow speed impact with a tree, and the front corner of the cage collapsed. So you can see two things. The lateral was not gusseted to the A pillar, but nothing was holding the top of the corner, and so the corner collapsed. And this roof design has absolutely no support for impact in the front top corners of the cage. And there are options to upgrade your cage if you have a design like this by adding another V. If you look at the crash of Ken Block at LSPR, where the cage did exceptionally well, it looks like the cage has forward V, but actually the cage has a diamond-shaped roof bar where it still connects in the center of the main hoop and has the two rear bars pushing on the strut towers in the back. The edges are maintained by the V in the main hoop design of those FIA cages. If you look at modern Rally 1 cars, they have forward V that is split in the front, and this is due to the design of the cage with a hybrid system that has two main hoops, one in the front and one in the rear, but you still have the two rear diagonal pushing to the rear strut towers. Also note the number of gussets in the back of the cage. None of the homologated FIA cage uses roof bar design, so if you have a cage, I strongly encourage you to fix it and either modify it to a cross or add a reverse V with a corresponding bar in the back. While we are on the topic of roof bars, there are a few cars out there that have the 253-14 roof bars, but without the supporting bars in the rear. And if you have a frontal impact, the V in the center is going to push on the main hoop and make the main hoop go down by pulling on the laterals, especially if you don't have diagonals in the main hoop. Thing to consider is a seal bar under the door bars in case of a side impact, especially on older cars where the rockers can be weak. That can help with preventing intrusion. In case of a frontal impact, it can also help with preventing the front foot of the cage from moving back. Another thing to pay attention to is how the cage is mounted to the floor, and you don't just put flat plates on the floor. You have to have an angle and minimum surface of the mounting plate, otherwise the cage can go through the floor, as is a well-known incident with the Mustang. About optional bars for your cage, you should also think about the chassis you are using and how well it did in crash tests. NASCAR has actually made an interesting study where they changed the front clip of the car to absorb more energy during the impact and transfer less energy to the occupant. So it's always a trade-off. If you extend the cage very far forward and you don't let the stock crush structure of the car absorb any energy, you will transfer all the energy to the occupant. But the other way, if the front of the cage is too far back, you will allow intrusion very far into the cockpit. Let's have a quick talk about logbooks. So logbooks are documents that live with the car, that document that the cage at the time it was inspecting was compliant to the rule of the sanctioning body, and over time all the events are logged into the logbook, and if any damage happened to the car, it is recorded in the logbook. FIA homologated cages have a diagram of the cage and a description of the material and sizing of the tubing used for homologating the cage. Those homologation papers are then used to issue either an FIA passport or a regular ARA or CARS or NASA logbook.
What you have to know about logbook is logbook issued today means that this car is compliant to the current rules of today. 30 years from now, this car might not be legal to run anywhere because the rules will have changed.
For example, if you look at this old Subaru GC Pro Drive car that has an FIA homologation, this car doesn't have diagonals in the main hoop, no windshield support bar, single roof bar. Even though the homologation papers are still legal, this car doesn't pass grandfathering rules at many sanctioning bodies.
So here you can see my older car. Logbook was issued in 2016 with the number that was stamped on the cage, and you will always have to put the picture of the car to identify the car. Unfortunately, there is no picture of the cage that is required in those logbooks, so we don't really know if the cage still matches what was
originally inspected.
And here for each event you will have an entry in the logbook. If there was a problem at one of the races, you will have notes in the logbook and it would have to be fixed for the next race. So here, for example, my last event, the car was wrecked and the cage was cut out, and so this logbook is terminated. If you have an incident at a race and the cage is damaged or a bar was cut for extraction, this would be written in the logbook. Most of the events, the scrutineer would hold on to the logbook until the repairs are done and have been re-inspected. And so you have to be very careful when you buy a used car to check the legality of the design of the cage and the size of the tubing and all that stuff for competing now. And you should also look at every page of the logbook to see if the car had damage, what the history of the car is. Not everything is necessarily logged in the logbook because some events don't keep logbooks and the car can go back home without the scrutineer having the time to write anything in the logbook. The car could have been damaged and it might not be in the logbook. So try to ask for the history of the car by people who know the car and have seen the car racing. I've been a scrutineer with ARA, NASA, SCCA, and I've been issuing logbooks for stage ready cars.
If you are applying for a new logbook, here are a few things we are looking for.
We are going to inspect the design, which kind of bars are in, the diameter of each bar, the thickness of each bar. Some scrutineers have an ultrasonic gauge to measure the thickness of the tubing. We like to have the tubes not painted if possible so that we can measure the actual thickness of the tubing without the paint. But sometime with time and rust and stuff, you have to paint before the cage gets rusted, so we can also measure with the paint. Some scrutineers just drill a hole in the main bars to measure with the caliper the thickness of the tubing. Then we're going to inspect every single weld as the gussets between the bar, the quality of the weld, make sure there is penetration. With an inspection camera, we're going to inspect the welds over the roof in the corner. We inspect the feet of the cage, make sure there's a minimum thickness of the plate, minimum surface of the plate, where they are anchored and secured to the chassis.
Finally, to conclude, a few tips on the things that scrutineer might look for. If you are building a new cage, don't hesitate to prepare a working document to share with your fabricator and the scrutineer to describe the plans of what you are trying to do and get feedback on the different elements of the cage and how you want the cage built. And this way you won't have any bad surprises when you get inspected for a logbook, and everything along the way will have been agreed between the fabricator and the scrutineer. Try to have dimples in your gusset. It makes inspecting the welds much easier inside the gussets. Rally cages must have a symmetrical design. You must have the same protection on the driver and co-driver side. You can't have different designs. Remember that the junction between your bars must be less than 100 millimeters from each other. The tubes, when they are bent, are less than 10% of shrinkage. The main hoop can't be tilted more than 10 degrees forward or backwards. The angle of the backstays is a minimum of 30 degrees. If your backstay is too vertical, in case of a frontal impact, the backstay is not going to be able to push back and absorb the impact. Usually you will want your backstays to be secured to the front of the rear strut towers. You cannot secure the backstay to the side of the strut tower. You will have to have a tube going all the way down to the frame rail of the car. Remember the minimum distances between bars and maximum height for in the door openings. This is an example of a car with a door bar that is too high. Another anecdote here for an FIA homologated cage that had a single diagonal and roof bar. There are the pictures of the install line. Actually, the diagonal in the main hoop has been installed in the wrong corner and nobody caught it, and the car has a logbook. You should also check the welds. A lot of cages have, even with logbooks, can have poor welds. The quality of the notching and the fitting of the tubes. Even though the FIA rule said that if your front lateral is bent by less than 20 degrees, the windscreen pillar reinforcement bar is optional. New rules like ARA require that windshield support bar for any build, no matter the angle. Seat belts, if they are using the stock mount, it's fine. If new anchoring points have been installed, they should be checked by the scrutineer. It is the same thing for the seat mounts. Stock seat mounts are fine. If they are aftermarket, there are requirements on the seat mounts. And finally, fuel cell, also make sure the installation is proper. Whether you are using a stock fuel tank or a fuel cell, the fuel lines, if they are inside the cockpit, should be routed inside the cage and not between the cage and the chassis. I encourage you to reassess your safety, whether you already have a cage car or you are trying to build a new car. Don't hesitate to contact me or any scrutineer near you. They are here to help you understand and improve your safety. I had a big crash at the 2024 Burke Hill climb, and having a properly built roll cage saved my life. There is a video analysis of this crash on this channel if you want to know more. Don't hesitate to like and subscribe to this channel. Thank you.